My name is Rebecca Sullivan, and at 34 years old, I never thought I would be the family member banished to the garage at my own parents' 40th anniversary celebration. I spent $300 on a gift and drove 6 hours to be there, only to find myself seated next to the recycling bins. When my mother casually mentioned it was just for extended family, something inside me finally snapped after years of subtle exclusion. Before I dive into what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Growing up as the middle child in the Sullivan family was like being the forgotten filling in a sandwich. My older sister Heather was the golden child from day one. Straight A student, homecoming queen, married her high school sweetheart Brad right after college, gave my parents 3 perfect grandchildren, and settled just 2 streets away from our childhood home. She became a pediatrician for goodness sake. How much more perfect could she be? Then there was my younger brother Cody. The baby of the family and the only boy, he got away with everything. Even when he totaled my dad's car at 16 or got caught with marijuana in his senior year, my parents would just sigh and say, "Boys will be boys." They poured thousands into bailing him out of one scrape after another, always ready with a safety net and second chances. And then there was me, Rebecca, perpetually stuck in the middle. Not spectacular enough to earn the praise showered on Heather, not troublesome enough to warrant the attention lavished on Cody. Just there. Reliable Rebecca who got decent grades, never caused problems, and eventually moved away to pursue a career in graphic design in Portland, 400 miles from our hometown of Boise. I left when I was 18, eager to escape the shadow of my siblings and forge my own identity. College was liberating. For the first time, people saw me for me, not as Heather's little sister or Cody's big sister. I thrived in my design classes, made genuine friends, and eventually landed a job at a respected advertising agency. I built a life I was proud of, complete with a cozy apartment, a rescue cat named Gatsby, and a circle of supportive friends. But no matter how successful I became professionally, visits home always seemed to reset the clock. Within minutes of walking through my parents' front door, I'd revert to being invisible middle child Rebecca. My mother Elaine would spend the first hour updating me on Heather's latest achievements or lamenting Cody's newest predicament. My father Thomas would pat my shoulder and ask generic questions about that drawing job of yours, never remembering that I was now the creative director overseeing a team of 7. Family gatherings were exercises in patience. 2 Thanksgivings ago, I noticed my place at the dinner table was squeezed in at the corner, half on the table extension, while Cody's girlfriend of 3 weeks got a prime spot next to Mom. Last Christmas, everyone received personalized stockings except me, who got one clearly purchased from the gas station on the way home. When I mentioned it, my mother laughed it off. "Oh, Rebecca, you've always been so sensitive." I tried to dismiss these slights as unintentional oversight rather than deliberate exclusion. After all, they were my parents. They loved me in their way, didn't they? I kept showing up, kept trying to earn their approval, kept hoping that someday they would see me. When the invitation arrived for their 40th anniversary celebration, I immediately marked it on my calendar. 40 years of marriage was a significant milestone, and I was determined to make an effort. I spent weeks searching for the perfect gift, eventually commissioning a local artist to create a hand-blown glass sculpture incorporating their wedding colors. It cost nearly $300, but I wanted them to have something meaningful, something that showed I cared even from a distance. The week before the party, I called my best friend Diana to help me process my anxiety about going home. "I just want this time to be different," I told her, pacing around my kitchen. "I've been doing so much work in therapy about my family dynamics. I think I'm ready to show up authentically and not fall into old patterns." Diana had been my rock since college, the sister I never had in Heather. She knew all my family stories and had wiped away more than a few tears after particularly difficult holidays. "Just remember who you are now," she advised. "You're not that overlooked kid anymore. You're a successful, independent woman who doesn't need their validation." "I know," I sighed, "but some part of me still wants it." "That's normal," Diana assured me. Just set boundaries if things get weird. You can always leave if it becomes too much. I never imagined how prophetic those words would become. The 6-hour drive to Boise gave me plenty of time to rehearse positive interactions in my head. I arrived the night before the party and checked into a hotel rather than staying at my parents' house. Another boundary I had established in recent years, another decision my mother never understood. We have plenty of room. She always protested, conveniently forgetting how she would inevitably rope me into hours of party preparation while Heather and Cody magically appeared just as guests arrived. That night in my hotel room, I wrapped their gift in silver paper and attached a card expressing genuine congratulations. 40 years together was something to celebrate, regardless of our complicated history. I went to sleep hopeful that tomorrow might be a turning point in our relationship. I had no idea just how right I would be, though not in the way I had imagined. The anniversary celebration was scheduled for 6 in the evening at the Sapphire Room, one of the most elegant restaurants in Boise. My parents had rented out the entire space, including the main dining room with its crystal chandeliers and panoramic views of the city. I arrived 30 minutes early. Partly from habit, I was always punctual, and partly because I wanted to help with any last-minute preparations. I had spent extra time getting ready, wearing a navy blue cocktail dress I had splurged on specifically for this occasion. My chestnut hair was styled in loose waves, and I had even visited a makeup counter that morning for a professional touch. The gift was carefully placed in a gift bag padded with tissue paper to protect the delicate glass sculpture during transport. I wanted everything to be perfect. As I walked through the restaurant's impressive entrance, I spotted my mother immediately, directing the staff like a general commanding troops. She was wearing a silver sequin dress that caught the light with every movement, her blonde hair freshly highlighted and styled in an elegant updo. "Rebecca, you made it," she said, air kissing near my cheek to avoid smudging her makeup. "Don't you look nice? Can you help the florist finish the centerpieces? Some of the arrangements seem a bit sparse." "No hello, no how was your drive, just straight to assigning tasks." Classic Elaine Sullivan. "Happy anniversary, Mom," I said, giving her a real hug despite her stiffening slightly to protect her outfit. "The place looks beautiful." "Yes, well, Heather found it. She knows the owner. Now about those flowers." I spent the next 20 minutes helping the clearly competent florist adjust arrangements that needed no adjusting. From across the room, I watched as other family members arrived. My sister Heather entered with her husband Brad and their 3 children, all dressed like they had stepped out of a catalog. My mother practically squealed with delight, embracing each grandchild and making a fuss over Heather's dress. Next came my father's sister, Aunt Meredith, who had criticized my career choice at every family gathering since I announced I was majoring in graphic design. "Computers do all the work these days, don't they?" was her favorite dismissive comment, as if I simply pressed a magic button labeled Create Art. I spotted my cousin Brandon slipping in through a side door. Brandon, my father's nephew, who had stolen $800 from my parents' bedroom during a family reunion 5 years ago. Everyone knew he had done it. He had eventually admitted it when confronted with evidence, yet here he was, welcomed back into the fold while I was still paying penance for moving so far away. My brother Cody arrived last, of course, looking surprisingly put together in a suit that actually fit. He had recently started a job at our father's construction company after bouncing between careers for the past decade. This latest attempt at stability had earned him a fresh wave of approval from our parents. "Rebecca, there you are," my father's voice boomed behind me. Thomas Sullivan was a big man with a personality to match. He enveloped me in a bear hug that smelled of the same aftershave he had worn my entire life. "Good to see you, kiddo." I was 34 years old and still kiddo to him, but I returned his hug warmly. My relationship with my father had always been less complicated than with my mother. He wasn't demonstrative with his affection, but at least he seemed genuinely pleased to see me when I visited. "Happy anniversary, Dad," I said, pulling back to look at him. His hair had more gray than the last time I'd seen him, and new lines had formed around his eyes. 40 years is quite an achievement." "Sure is," he agreed, looking around proudly at the gathering crowd. Your mother has outdone herself with this party. Wait until you see the cake. As more guests arrived, I continued helping with small tasks, greeting relatives and old family friends. I noticed everyone being directed to their seats in the main dining room as the official start time approached. Beautiful place cards marked each setting at the elegantly decorated tables. I approached my mother, who was checking something off her clipboard. Where am I sitting, Mom? I don't see my place card. She barely looked up. Oh, we had to make some last-minute adjustments. You'll be in the little room off to the side. The one connected to the kitchen. The side room? I repeated, confused. Not in the main dining room with everyone else? It's just for extended family, she said dismissively. Come, I'll show you. Extended family? What did that even mean? I was her daughter. How much more immediate could family get? Bewildered, I followed my mother through a service door near the kitchen. She led me into what was essentially a converted garage or a storage area that the restaurant had dressed up with a few hasty decorations. A folding table with a cloth thrown over it held mismatched chairs. The lighting was harsh compared to the soft ambience of the main room. Here we are, she said brightly, as if she were showing me to the presidential suite instead of what was clearly the overflow space. The servers know to come in here too, so don't worry about that. I stood frozen, looking around at this sad little annex. Mom, why am I seated out here instead of with you and Dad and everyone else? I told you it's for extended family. We simply couldn't fit everyone in the main room. Now I need to get back to greeting guests. The Hendersons just arrived. And with that, she was gone, leaving me standing alone in what I would soon discover was my designated exile. The little room off to the side was, to put it bluntly, a glorified garage. Despite the white tablecloth thrown over the folding table and the single vase of flowers that looked suspiciously like leftovers from the main room arrangements, there was no disguising what this space truly was. The concrete floor had been hastily covered with an area rug that didn't quite reach the walls. Boxes of wine and extra linens were stacked in one corner, partially hidden behind a decorative screen. The service entrance to the kitchen swung open every few minutes as staff bustled through, carrying trays destined for the real party in the main dining room. I stood there alone, my gift bag suddenly feeling heavy in my hands. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted in from the main room, accentuating the hollow emptiness surrounding me. I placed my purse on one of the mismatched chairs and walked back toward the doorway connecting to the main space. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. Every member of my immediate family was seated at the head table. My parents sat in the center, with Heather and her family to my mother's right, Cody to my father's left. Aunt Meredith had a prime spot at a nearby table with other close relatives. And there, just 2 seats away from my father, sat Cousin Brandon, the family thief, laughing as he sipped champagne from a crystal flute. Everyone who was actually family was in there. Everyone except me. I stepped back into the garage room, my chest tight with disbelief. My mother's words echoed in my head, "It's just for extended family." But I was looking right at extended family seated in the main room. Cousins, aunts, uncles, even my parents' neighbors of 20 years had spots at the proper tables. I was the only blood relative banished to the garage. When my mother bustled back in a few minutes later, I confronted her as calmly as I could. "Mom, I don't understand. Why am I out here when everyone else is in there? Even Brandon is sitting near Dad and he stole from you guys." My mother's expression tightened almost imperceptibly before smoothing into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rebecca, we've forgiven Brandon for that unfortunate incident. It was years ago, and he's family. And what am I?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Don't be dramatic," she sighed. "We simply had space constraints. The seating chart was a nightmare to figure out. Heather spent hours on it." Of course, Heather had made the seating chart. Somehow that made it both better and worse. "So, I'm the only one who didn't make the cut for the main room? Your own daughter." "There will be others out here soon," she said, glancing at her watch impatiently. "The Johnsons are bringing their exchange student, and Dad's golf buddies will be here shortly. Now I really must get back. The caterers need direction on when to serve the appetizers." And just like that, she was gone again, leaving me standing in what I now understood was essentially the reject room. Not just extended family, but people who didn't quite make the A-list. People like me, apparently. I sank into one of the chairs, pulled out my phone, and texted Diana, "You're not going to believe where they've seated me. In the garage. Not even joking. Everyone else is in the main room." Her response was immediate. "What the actual hell? Are you serious?" "Dead serious. Mom says it's for extended family, but literally everyone else, including Brandon who stole from them, is in the main room." That's beyond messed up. What are you going to do? What was I going to do? I sat there, watching as the extended family began to trickle in. First came my father's coworker and his wife, looking confused about their placement. Then an elderly couple I didn't recognize who turned out to be distant cousins of my mother from Minnesota. My parents' neighbor's adult son and his girlfriend arrived next, followed by a young man who was apparently an intern at my father's company. All of us displaced persons exchanged awkward glances as we realized our second-tier status. The servers came in, looking slightly embarrassed as they distributed appetizers that had clearly been picked over already in the main room. Through the doorway, I could see my family gathered around my parents, raising toasts, taking photos, and generally having the celebration I had driven 6 hours to be part of. I watched as my mother beamed at something Heather said, as my father clapped Cody on the back with obvious pride. I saw Brandon, the thief, lean in to tell a story that had the whole table laughing. And something inside me, some dam that had been holding back years of hurt and disappointment, began to crack. I thought about all the times I had made excuses for being treated as less than, all the times I had told myself I was imagining the disparity in how we were treated. I thought about that sad gas station stocking at Christmas, the squeezed in place at Thanksgiving, the forgotten birthdays and dismissed accomplishments. This garage seating wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the most blatant manifestation of my place in the family hierarchy that had ever been presented to me. It was as if my mother had finally made visual what had always been true. I was on the outside looking in. I looked down at the gift bag containing the beautiful glass sculpture I had so carefully selected. I had spent hours picking out something meaningful, something that symbolized the enduring, if imperfect, bond of family. The irony wasn't lost on me. From the main room, I heard my father beginning a speech. "Elaine, and I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate 40 years together," his voice carried clearly. "We're blessed to have our family here with us tonight." Our family. The ones in the main room, he meant. Not the afterthoughts in the garage. That was the moment I made my decision. I sat in that garage for exactly 2 more minutes, listening to my father's speech about family bonds and support through thick and thin. Each word was like a needle pricking at the bubble of complacency I had lived in for years. The irony was almost unbearable. Here was my father waxing poetic about the importance of family, while his own daughter sat segregated from the celebration like an embarrassing secret. The rational part of my brain urged caution. Maybe there really had been a space issue. Maybe this wasn't the deliberate slight it appeared to be. Maybe causing a scene would only prove my mother right about me being too sensitive. But another voice, one that had been silenced for too long, spoke louder. This voice reminded me of all the therapy sessions where I had worked to acknowledge my worth. It reminded me of Diana's words about boundaries and not accepting mistreatment. It reminded me that I deserved basic respect, especially from the people who were supposed to love me most. I stood up, smoothed down my dress, and picked up the gift bag. Taking a deep breath, I walked deliberately through the doorway into the main dining room, my heels clicking against the polished floor like a metronome counting down to confrontation. My father was mid-sentence when the room began to notice me. Heads turned, conversations paused, and a ripple of confusion spread across the gathered faces. I didn't stop until I reached the head table, standing directly across from my parents. "Rebecca?" My father faltered, clearly thrown off his rhythm. "Is everything all right?" "No, Dad. Everything is not all right," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "I just wanted to come in from the garage to deliver my gift before I leave." A murmur ran through the room. My mother's face flushed deep red. The garage? My father repeated, looking confused. Yes, the garage, I confirmed. That's where I've been seated for your anniversary party. Not in here with the rest of the family, but out there with the storage boxes and kitchen access door. Mom said it was for extended family, but somehow I'm the only actual family member out there. My mother leaned forward, her voice a harsh whisper. Rebecca, this is neither the time nor place. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene? I laughed, though there was no humor in it. Mom, you seated your own daughter in the garage while everyone else, including Brandon who stole $800 from your bedroom, gets a spot in here. If anyone is making a scene, it's you. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while several other relatives exchanged shocked glances. We simply had space constraints, my mother insisted, her voice rising slightly. If you're going to be childish about it. Space constraints? I interrupted, gesturing around the room where I could count at least 4 empty chairs. There's literally empty seats in here right now. Those are reserved, she snapped. Really, Rebecca? I expected better from you. And I expected better from you, Mom. For 34 years, I've expected better. I've accepted being the forgotten middle child. I've smiled through being seated at the kids' table well into my 20s. I've pretended not to notice when my accomplishments are dismissed while Heather's are celebrated and Cody's failures are coddled. But this? I shook my head. This is where I draw the line. My father looked genuinely shocked. Rebecca, honey, I had no idea you were seated in the back room. I assumed you were just arriving late. Well, surprise, Dad. I've been here the whole time, helping arrange flowers and greeting guests before being escorted to my designated spot with the other afterthoughts. Heather finally spoke up, her perfect composure slipping just slightly. Rebecca, we had to make difficult decisions about the seating chart. Some sacrifices had to be made. And somehow I was the only sacrifice, I replied. Funny how that works, isn't it? Always has been. My mother stood up, clearly determined to end this disruption. That's enough, Rebecca. If you can't behave appropriately at our celebration, perhaps it's best if you do leave. A hush fell over the room. The moment hung suspended, all eyes shifting between my mother and me. I felt a lifetime of suppressed emotions surging through my body, but rather than the explosion they might have expected, I channeled it into a cold clarity. You know what, Mom? For once, we agree completely. I placed the gift bag carefully on the table. 40 years is an impressive milestone. I hope the next 40 bring you more compassion and self-awareness than the first 40 apparently did. I turned to address the shocked faces around the room. Sorry for the interruption, everyone. Please enjoy your dinner in the main room. And for those of you seated in the garage with me, the service is surprisingly good despite the ambience. My mother's face was a storm of emotions, but it was my father's expression that nearly broke my resolve. He looked stricken, like he was seeing something clearly for the first time, and the revelation was painful. Rebecca, wait, he started, but I was already turning away. Extended family, I said over my shoulder, placing deliberate emphasis on each syllable. Extend this. I walked out with my head high, ignoring the whispers that erupted in my wake. I could hear my father calling my name, his chair scraping back as he stood. But I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot, the cool evening air shock against my flushed skin. I had almost reached my car when I heard the restaurant door slam open behind me. Rebecca, stop, please. My father's voice, urgent and pleading. Despite everything, I found myself turning around. My father jogged across the parking lot, his dress shoes unsuited for the pace. By the time he reached me, he was slightly out of breath, his face flushed from exertion and emotion. The restaurant door swung open again behind him, revealing my mother's silhouette, but she remained at the threshold, watching from a distance. What the hell was that about? He demanded, his tone a mixture of anger and confusion. You completely disrupted our anniversary party. That's what you're concerned about. I shot back. The disruption? Not the fact that your daughter was seated in a converted garage while everyone else was in the main room? I didn't know about that, he insisted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I swear to God, Rebecca, I had no idea you were seated back there. When I asked your mother where you were, she said you were helping with something and would join us soon. His words took some of the wind out of my sails. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception, but found only genuine distress. You really didn't know? He spread his hands wide. Why would I want my daughter sitting apart from everyone else? That makes no sense. I leaned against my car, suddenly exhausted. Well, Mom certainly knew. She personally escorted me to the garage and told me it was for extended family. Whatever that means. My father's expression darkened. I'm going to have a serious talk with her about this. It's completely unacceptable. Is it though? I asked quietly. Unacceptable, I mean. Because from where I'm standing, it seems pretty consistent with how things have always been. What are you talking about? We've always treated all our children the same. The laugh that escaped me held no humor. Dad, you can't possibly believe that. Of course we have. We love all of you equally. Love isn't the issue, I said, feeling oddly calm now that the initial adrenaline was wearing off. It's not about whether you love me. It's about how that love is expressed or not expressed. It's about always feeling like I'm on the outside looking in. My father shook his head in disbelief. That's not true. We've always been there for you. Have you? When was the last time either of you visited me in Portland? Heather and her family get regular visits. You've bailed Cody out of countless jams. But me? I get occasional phone calls where Mom talks about everyone else's lives and barely asks about mine. He opened his mouth to object, then closed it again, looking troubled. When I got promoted to creative director last year, I continued, I called to tell you both. Do you remember what Mom said? That's nice, dear. Did you hear Heather's son made the honor roll? You didn't even acknowledge it, Dad. Not even a congratulations. I didn't realize. He began, then stopped. I guess I just assumed you were doing fine. You've always been so independent, so capable. Because I had to be, I said softly. Because somewhere along the line, I figured out that I wasn't going to get the attention or support that Heather and Cody received, so I'd better learn to stand on my own. My father leaned against the car beside me, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. I never wanted you to feel that way. I know you didn't, but intentions don't change the reality. We stood in silence for a moment, watching as a few other guests entered the restaurant, giving us curious glances as they passed. Your mother had a complicated relationship with her own mother, my father finally said. Did you know that? Her mother always favored her sister, made her feel second best. I wonder sometimes if that affected how she relates to her own children. That might explain it, but it doesn't excuse it, I replied. And it doesn't explain why you never noticed or intervened. He sighed heavily. I think I was so focused on providing for everyone, on being the breadwinner, that I missed a lot of what was happening in our home. That's on me, and I'm sorry. His apology, simple and straightforward, landed like a key turning in a long jammed lock. How long had I waited to hear those words? The garage thing, he continued, that's a symptom of something deeper, isn't it? Something that's been building for years. I nodded, throat tight with emotion. Tonight just made visible what I've felt for most of my life. And Brandon is seated in there while you're not? That's. He shook his head, clearly struggling to process it all. I don't understand how your mother could make that decision. Ask her, I suggested. Because I've spent my whole adult life trying to figure out why I'm always the odd one out, and I'm tired of guessing. My father straightened up, a resolve settling over his features. I will. But first, I want you to come back inside. Dad, I don't think that's a good idea. I've already caused enough of a scene. A scene that needed to be caused, apparently, he countered. Please, Rebecca, come back in. Not for your mother, not even for me. For yourself. Don't let this moment be about you leaving. Let it be about you finally being seen. His words resonated with something deep inside me. Wasn't that what I had wanted all along? Not special treatment, just to be seen, To be acknowledged as an equal member of the family? What about Mom? She basically told me to leave. Let me handle your mother, he said, a new firmness in his voice I hadn't heard before. It's time for some truths to be spoken in this family. Starting with the fact that what happened tonight was wrong, and we need to acknowledge that. I hesitated, weighing my options. I could drive away, maintain my dignity through distance, go back to Portland and my independent life. Or I could walk back into that restaurant beside my father, facing the discomfort and potential conflict, but also standing in my truth. Diana's voice echoed in my mind. Just remember who you are now. You're not that overlooked kid anymore. Okay, I finally said. I'll come back in, but I'm not going to pretend everything's fine. I wouldn't expect you to, my father said, and for the first time that evening, he smiled slightly. You've never been one to sugarcoat things. That's what I've always admired about you. That small acknowledgement, that recognition of a quality he valued in me, felt like a tiny crack in a dam. Not enough to break it entirely, but enough to let a trickle of healing begin. Side by side, we walked back toward the restaurant, toward my mother still standing in the doorway, toward a family gathering that had been irrevocably changed. Walking back into the sapphire room, beside my father felt like entering a different dimension. The space remained physically identical, all crystal chandeliers and elegant place settings, but the emotional atmosphere had transformed entirely. Conversations hushed as we entered, all eyes turning toward us with varying degrees of curiosity, concern, and in some cases, judgment. My mother still stood near the entrance, her posture rigid and her expression a complicated mixture of anger and embarrassment. When she spotted us, her eyes widened slightly in surprise, as if she hadn't expected my father to actually bring me back. Thomas, she began, her voice tight, the servers are waiting to bring out the main course. Everyone's been sitting there while you were outside. The food can wait, Elaine, my father replied, his tone brooking no argument. We need to talk. Now. Without waiting for her response, he gently guided both of us toward a small alcove off the main dining room, private enough for conversation, but still visible to the other guests. A signal, I realized, that whatever happened next wouldn't be swept under the rug. This is completely inappropriate, my mother hissed once we were relatively secluded. You're ruining our anniversary celebration. No, Elaine, my father said quietly. You did that when you decided to seat our daughter in the garage. It's not a garage, she protested. It's an auxiliary dining space. With storage boxes and a concrete floor, I added. Let's not pretend it was anything other than what it was. My mother turned to me, eyes flashing. I don't appreciate your tone, Rebecca, or the scene you caused in front of our guests. It was childish and embarrassing. What's embarrassing, my father interjected before I could respond, is discovering that my wife deliberately excluded our daughter from the main celebration. Why would you do that, Elaine? And don't tell me it was about space constraints. I can see empty chairs from here. My mother's composure faltered slightly. The seating arrangements were complicated. We had to consider relationships, conversations, who would get along with whom. And somehow that calculation ended with Rebecca in the back room while Brandon, who stole from us, gets a prime spot? My father pressed. Brandon is family, she said defensively. And what am I? I asked, echoing my earlier question. For the first time, my mother seemed at a loss for words. She looked between my father and me, perhaps realizing that her usual tactics of dismissal and deflection weren't going to work this time. You've always been different, Rebecca, she finally said, her voice softer but no less pointed. Always so independent, so determined to do things your own way, moving so far away, barely visiting. I moved away for college and career opportunities, I reminded her. And I visit as often as I can. The difference is, you and Dad have visited Heather countless times, but have never once come to see my home in Portland. Heather has the children, my mother countered. And she lives closer. It's a 2-hour flight, Mom. Not an expedition to Antarctica. My father cleared his throat. I think what's happening here goes deeper than tonight's seating arrangement or how often we visit each other. There's something fundamental about how we relate as a family that needs addressing. A server approached, looking uncomfortable about interrupting. "Excuse me, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan. The guests are wondering about dinner service." "Tell them we'll be just a few more minutes," my father said firmly. "And please make sure everyone in the side room is being properly attended to." After the server left, my mother sighed heavily. "This isn't the time or place for a family therapy session, Thomas." "Maybe not," he conceded, "but it is time for some honesty. Elaine, I need to understand why you would treat our daughter this way. Not just tonight, but all the patterns Rebecca is describing. Is there something I've been missing all these years?" My mother's carefully maintained facade finally cracked. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. "You remind me so much of my sister," she said quietly. "The same confidence, the same talent, the same way of moving through the world like it owes you something." "Your sister?" I repeated, confused. "Aunt Judith? I barely know her. She lives in Florida." "Exactly," my mother said. "She left. Just like you left." She pursued her dreams without a backward glance, while I stayed and did what was expected. Heather stayed too. "Cody needs us. But you," she shook her head. "You never seem to need anyone." The revelation stunned me into momentary silence. All these years, my mother's treatment of me had been colored by her unresolved feelings about her own sister. "Mom," I said carefully, "I left for college, not to abandon the family. And I built a life I'm proud of, but that doesn't mean I don't need or want you in it. I've been trying to connect with you for years, but you've always kept me at arm's length." "She's right, Elaine," my father added. "Rebecca calls, she visits, she makes an effort. We're the ones who haven't reciprocated." My mother's eyes filled with tears, though whether from genuine remorse or simple frustration at being confronted, I couldn't tell. "I've always done my best," she insisted. "I've always tried to be a good mother." "I know you have," I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. "But trying to be a good mother and actually seeing your children for who they are can be different things." From the main room, I could see Heather approaching cautiously, concern evident on her face. Behind her, Cody hovered uncertainly. "Is everything okay?" Heather asked, looking between the three of us. "People are starting to really wonder what's going on." "No, everything is not okay," my father answered honestly. "We're having a long, overdue family discussion. It seems your sister has been feeling excluded from this family for years, and tonight's seating arrangement was the last straw." Heather had the grace to look embarrassed. "About that? Mom told me you requested to sit separately, Rebecca. She said you wanted more space." I stared at my mother in disbelief. "You told her what?" My mother couldn't meet my eyes. "I thought it would be easier that way." "Easier for whom?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. Cody stepped forward. "Wait, so you didn't ask to sit in the back room? Mom told me you were coming late and might not stay for dinner anyway." The web of deceptions was unraveling rapidly. I looked at my siblings, seeing confusion and the beginning of understanding dawning on their faces. "I think," my father said slowly, "that we've all been operating under some false assumptions for a very long time. And while tonight isn't the ideal time to unpack all of that, we can at least start by correcting one wrong." He turned to my mother. "Elaine, Rebecca will be seated at our table for the remainder of this celebration. I'm sure we can make room." It wasn't a request. For perhaps the first time in their marriage, my father was directly challenging my mother's social orchestrations. The moment hung suspended, a turning point not just for tonight, but potentially for our family's future dynamics. My mother looked around at all of us, perhaps recognizing that she was outnumbered, or perhaps finally seeing the hurt her actions had caused. Whatever the reason, she nodded stiffly. "Fine. We can rearrange things." It wasn't an apology or even a full acknowledgement, but it was a concession. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. As we prepared to return to the main room, I caught Heather's eye. "Did you really not know?" I asked quietly. She had the decency to look ashamed. I suspected something wasn't right, but it was easier not to question it.
I'm sorry, Rebecca.
I should have checked with you directly. Her apology, imperfect but sincere, was unexpected. Perhaps I wasn't the only one beginning to see our family dynamics with clearer eyes. Together, the Sullivan family walked back into the anniversary celebration, presenting a united front that concealed the seismic shifts happening beneath the surface. But as my father guided me to a hastily added chair at the head table, right between him and Cody, I knew that nothing would ever be quite the same again. And for once, that felt like progress. The remainder of the anniversary party unfolded like a surreal dream. I found myself seated at the head table between my father and brother, directly across from Heather, while servers hurriedly brought an extra place setting. The elegant china and crystal looked exactly like what had been laid out in the main dining room all along, making the contrast with the mismatched tableware in the garage even more stark. My mother maintained her composure with practiced social grace, though I could see the tension in her smile as she explained to curious guests that there had been a little misunderstanding about the seating arrangements. My father remained unusually quiet but kept his hand protectively near mine, as if making sure I wouldn't disappear again. The food was delicious, though I hardly tasted it. My mind was still processing the confrontation and revelations that had preceded this awkward family dinner. Occasionally, I caught sympathetic glances from other guests who had witnessed the earlier scene. My father's sister Meredith leaned over at one point to whisper, "Good for you, Rebecca. It's about time someone stood up to Elaine." As the dinner plates were cleared and dessert was served, Brandon approached our table, looking uncomfortable. "Rebecca, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, gesturing toward a quieter corner. Curious, I followed him, aware of my parents watching us. "Look," he said once we had some privacy, "I wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened. I had no idea you were seated in the back room. If I had known, I would have offered to switch places." "Would you?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I'd like to think so. I know I messed up bad with the money thing years ago, but I've been trying to make amends. Aunt Elaine has been really supportive of my recovery." Recovery. The word caught me by surprise. "You're in recovery?" 3 years sober, he confirmed. "The stealing, it was when I was at my worst with the addiction. I've paid them back every cent, plus interest." This was news to me, another piece of family information that had never been shared. "I didn't know," I admitted. "I'm glad you're doing better." "Thanks," he said. "And seriously, what happened tonight wasn't right. You're more family than I am." His unexpected support touched me. "Thank you for saying that, Brandon." As the evening progressed, similar moments occurred with various family members. My brother Cody found me by the dessert table and awkwardly admitted, "I never realized how differently Mom treated you. I guess I was too caught up in my own drama to notice." "We all have our blind spots," I told him, surprised by my own generosity of spirit. Even Heather made an effort, pulling me aside before the cake cutting. "I've been thinking about what happened," she said, her perfect composure slightly fractured. "And I realized I've been complicit in how you've been treated. I've accepted the favoritism because it benefited me, and that wasn't fair to you." "No, it wasn't," I agreed, not making it easier for her but not being needlessly harsh either. "I'd like to try to do better," she offered. "Maybe we could talk more regularly? Get to know each other as adults." The olive branch was tentative, but seemed genuine. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. When it came time for my parents to cut their anniversary cake, my father insisted I stand beside them for the photos, positioning me between himself and my mother. "All our children should be in these pictures," he declared, loud enough for everyone to hear. My mother's smile remained fixed, but I felt her hand trembling slightly as it brushed against mine. Whether from anger, shame, or some combination of emotions, I couldn't tell. But for once, I wasn't being erased from the family narrative. As the party wound down, my father pulled me aside. "Will you come to the house tomorrow before you drive back? I think we need to talk more, all of us." "I don't know, Dad." I hesitated. Tonight was pretty draining. "Please," he said, and the sincerity in his eyes was impossible to refuse. I think this could be a turning point for our family, but only if we follow through. All right, I agreed. But I'm not pretending everything is fixed after one conversation. I wouldn't expect you to, he said. Real change takes time and effort. I just want us to make a start. I left the party that night with mixed emotions. The confrontation had been necessary but exhausting. Standing in my truth had been empowering but also terrifying. And the road ahead with my family looked uncertain, potentially painful, but also possibly healing. Back in my hotel room, I called Diana, who had been anxiously awaiting updates throughout the evening. So you actually went back in? She asked incredulously after I'd filled her in. That took serious guts, Rebecca. It felt right, I said, kicking off my heels and sinking onto the bed. Running away would have just reinforced the old pattern. This way, I disrupted it. And your mom? Is she actually going to acknowledge what she did? I sighed. I don't know. She made excuses more than apologies tonight. But something definitely shifted with my dad and siblings. That's a start. I'm proud of you, Diana said. This is what we talked about in all those therapy sessions, right? Setting boundaries, speaking your truth, not accepting mistreatment even from family. Especially from family, I corrected her. They're supposed to be the ones who see you most clearly and love you most unconditionally. The next morning, I met with my family at my parents' house. The conversation was difficult, with moments of defensiveness, particularly from my mother, but also surprising vulnerability. My father, especially, seemed determined to understand how he had contributed to the dynamics that had hurt me for so long. I think I convinced myself that because you were doing well on your own, you didn't need the same attention as your siblings, he admitted. But everyone needs to be seen and valued, especially by their parents. My mother struggled more with accountability, falling back on justifications about how busy she'd been with Heather's children and Cody's problems. But even she eventually acknowledged, perhaps I haven't been as attentive to your life as I could have been. That wasn't intentional. It wasn't the full recognition I might have hoped for, but it was more than I'd ever received before. And when I left to drive back to Portland that afternoon, something had shifted both within me and within our family system. Over the following weeks and months, small changes began to accumulate. My father called regularly, asking specific questions about my work and life. Heather sent occasional texts, awkward at first, but gradually more natural. Even my mother made an effort, sending a card when I landed a major new client, the first time she had ever acknowledged a professional achievement of mine. 3 months after the anniversary party incident, my parents actually visited Portland. My father seemed genuinely interested in seeing my workplace and meeting my friends, while my mother made polite if somewhat stiff efforts to engage with my life there. It wasn't perfect. Decades of established patterns don't dissolve overnight. There were still moments of frustration, of feeling misunderstood or overlooked. But there was also a new foundation of honesty. I no longer pretended everything was fine when it wasn't. I spoke up when old dynamics emerged. And increasingly, my family listened. 6 months later, we gathered for a much smaller celebration, my father's birthday dinner. It was held at their home, just immediate family. When I arrived, I discovered my mother had set the dining room table with place cards. With some trepidation, I looked for mine. It was at my father's right hand, a position of honor. When our eyes met across the room, my mother gave a small nod, acknowledgement without words. It wasn't a grand gesture, but in the context of our history, it spoke volumes. That night, watching my family interact with new awareness and intention, I reflected on what I had learned through this difficult journey. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Accepting mistreatment, even from family, doesn't serve anyone in the long run. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a relationship is to disrupt destructive patterns, even when that disruption is uncomfortable. And healing often begins with the courage to say, "This isn't right." I had spent so many years trying to earn my place in my family, trying to be perfect enough, successful enough, accommodating enough to finally be fully included. What I eventually realized was that worthiness isn't earned, it's inherent. I deserved respect and inclusion not because of what I had achieved or how I behaved, but simply because I was their daughter and sister. The garage seating incident became a turning point not because it was so much worse than what had come before, but because it made visible what had always been true. Sometimes we need that stark visual representation of dysfunction before we can acknowledge what's been happening all along. My relationship with my family continues to evolve. There are steps forward and occasional steps back. But we're on a different path now, one built on truth rather than pretense, on authentic connection rather than roles and expectations. If you're watching this and it resonates with your own family experience, know that you're not alone. Family dynamics can be incredibly painful, especially when they involve feeling excluded or devalued. But change is possible. It begins with acknowledging your own worth and refusing to accept treatment that diminishes it. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who weren't treating you right? What happened when you did? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found value in mine, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes knowing others have walked this path can give us the courage to take our own first steps toward healing. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you deserve a seat at the table, not in the garage. And sometimes you have to be the one to claim it.